this is Kurt, and today I am starting what is going to be an 8-part review of one of my favorite animated TV series, and this is called The Spectacular Spider-Man. And it's, if you don't know what this is an animated series that ran for 2 seasons. It was supposed to run for more than that, but it ended up getting canceled because there were issues with the rights to the series. And each season had 13 episodes, and it's split into 8 story arcs. And in the DVD pack, each of the 8 discs is one of the story arcs, each of which contains 3 or 4 episodes. Most of the story arcs contain 3 episodes, but 2 of them have 4 episodes on them. And this is what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reviewing each of the story arcs. I'll be doing one each day, and I don't know if I'm going to do all the days in a row for each of the 8 days because I have to find time to watch these. I mean, I'm off of my job for a few weeks right now, kind of a mini summer vacation type thing, but not exactly. So I have a lot of time to do this kind of stuff, but at the same time, I have to find time where everything is quiet and I'm not bothered by people walking around and talking and working and calling me and stuff. So I have to find just the right times to do these. So if there's a day or even a few days where I'm not doing this, don't think that I've canceled the review series because it's going to keep going even if it takes 3 years or whatever. But this series, I'm going to try to get it done. But I'm only going to upload 1 review a day unless I change my mind, which I do change my mind frequently on things, but I'm going to try to set it this way so that I only do one review a day. And I was originally going to do 1 episode each day rather than 1 story arc each day, but when I really come down to thinking about it, it's a lot easier to do the story arcs instead. Like, do each story arc as a review rather than each individual episode. Because the thing is, the story arcs, they tell, even though the entire series does have like an overarching story, which doesn't get completely 100% resolved because the series got canceled, of course, each story arc also has a beginning, middle, and end to it. So it's like each episode, you kind of do want to watch each story arc from beginning to end so that you can see like the complete overarching beginning, middle, and end story that each one has. But so I'm going to be doing the first story arc today, disc 1, which is episodes 1 through 3. So before you watch this review, if you haven't seen episodes 1 through 3 of The Spectacular Spider-Man, you should go and watch those. And I don't care if you watch all the episodes ahead of time. Like, you could binge watch them all in one day, but I don't care if you do that. But if you haven't seen the show, there are spoilers, so sorry. Bit of a cough. Sorry. Anyway, and I also, after I finish doing my Spectacular Spider-Man review, I'm also going to be doing a video series where I review each story arc there were 13 in the original version, 13 story arcs in the original version. I don't know how many there are in the current version, which is the one I'm going to be reading, but I'm going to be doing reviews of each of the story arcs from the fanfic Fighting Crimes, Spinning Webs by the band Dragoness. And which, if you haven't read, I highly recommend. I haven't read the current version yet, because I read the original. Technically not the original, because there's older drafts of that as well. But I read the old one last summer. And then I'm going to read the new one this summer. The current one. The director's cut. Anyway, so, there are spoilers for the show in each of these episodes. And there's also spoilers for other Spider-Man related stuff, like the comics and the movies, including the Far From Home movie, which just came out. So there will be spoilers for that movie, most likely, because I'll have to talk about that one a little bit. So if you haven't seen Far From Home yet, you probably don't want to watch this review series yet. So let's get on with it. Okay, so a little bit of background for this series before I begin this. I was introduced to Spider-Man. Well, I've known about Spider-Man since I was a kid, because I had Spider-Man toys and Spider-Man clothes and stuff. I had Spider-Man pajamas. Like, I actually had Spider-Man pajamas. It actually looked like the Spider-Man suit, minus the mask and the gloves and the shoes. And it actually had the underarm webbing and everything. It was really cool. Like the underarm webbing from the comics that didn't appear in any of the movies until the MCU, where he like uses it to glide and stuff, which I thought was really cool. But I think I got introduced to Spider-Man's origin, like the way he got his powers and the enemies he fought and everything, through a combination of two things. One was the book from DK Publishing. It was like a kids series with like simplified vocabulary and stuff, and it was called The Story of Spider-Man. And there was another book from the same series that was also called Spider-Man and His Amazing Powers. I got a lot of my information from those two books, like information on his enemies, on his powers and stuff. And it has simplified vocabulary because it's for little kids and everything. But I did learn a lot about Spider-Man from that. And then I also saw the original, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie on TV. And that's where I learned a lot about something. Because one night, I think this was one night, I don't remember how old I was. I might have been 6 or 7 or something. But my parents said the Spider-Man movie was going to be on TV that night. And so we all sat down and watched it, and we loved it. And it was a movie I really enjoyed. And then I think a few years later, we tape recorded Spider-Man 2 off TV. With Dr. Octopus. Yeah, that one. And I saw Spider-Man 3 at a relative's house a few years later, because they had it on DVD. And I liked all those movies. But then also, around the time I saw Spider-Man 3 was around the time I started watching a lot of like cartoons on TV and stuff. It's not like I didn't watch cartoons on TV up until that point, but a lot of the stuff I watched was more like the preschool stuff, like the stuff you'd see on PBS Kids or something, or cartoon movies. But I started watching stuff on Toon Disney, and which doesn't exist anymore, of course. They replaced it with Disney XD. But Toon Disney they had Spider-Man the Animated Series syndicated. And Spider-Man the Animated Series was a show that some of my relatives were familiar with. They had told me how great it was. So seeing that syndicated and being able to see all those episodes and stuff of the animated series from the 90s, which has some really great voice acting. I think the Spider-Man voice actor, that's one of the voices I usually hear in the comics whenever I'm reading them, because he did such a good job. That's where I got a lot of my knowledge from about Spider-Man as a kid, because I actually watched that show more than I saw the movies up until I got into 7th grade. I think the summer before 7th grade, I actually started watching the movies again, and they were great, because I think by then either the animated series wasn't being syndicated anymore, or it was only on really, really late at night when I was in bed. Yeah, I can't remember, but there was a point where it was on really, really late at night when there was no way I was going to get up in the middle of the night to watch that, like 2 in the morning or something. But, sorry, I keep clearing my throat, but... And then also I had a demo of Spider-Man 2000, a really, really rare demo that was made by Kellogg's, that included the first 3 missions of the game, I think it is. The first 3 stages of the game, like with the bank robbery and then Scorpion and the police chopper chase and then the Rhino fight. The first 3 missions of the game, I believe it's called. And I enjoyed that, and I really like the voice actor who does Spider-Man on that too. I believe he was on the sequel series to Spider-Man the Animated Series. Originally intended to be the sequel series of Spider-Man the Animated Series, but I think they retconned it as being a completely different universe to the animated series. But the voice actor from Spider-Man Unlimited did the voice of Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2000. Even though I don't really like Spider-Man Unlimited, I think it's kind of stupid, but the voice actor who did Spider-Man was really, really good. And then, Spectacular Spider-Man. We're getting into this now. Okay, the Spectacular Spider-Man was a show that up until about a year and a half ago, I never actually saw. Well, I did see it, but I only saw, like, episodes here and there. I never really sat down and actually watched it daily or anything, even though Disney XD picked it up at one point. I think they picked it up when the 2nd season came around, and they reran the first season before they did the 2nd season. And I saw a bunch of the episodes of that. Not really enough to really get an idea of what was going on, and I was kind of turned off by the character designs and everything, but I did really think they had something going on in that series, even though I only saw episodes here and there, didn't really get a sense of the overarching plot line or anything, storyline, whatever you call it. And but I heard really, really good things about it in later years, especially during, like, high school and stuff. And, I think this was around, yes, I know when it was, actually. This was, my summer after 8th grade, so the summer before I entered high school. And this was, of course, the summer around the time where, The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield came out, which I did like. I thought it was really well done. The second one is absolute crap, but the first one is okay, even though it's not better than the first 2 Raimi films. And I'm still debating whether it's even better than the third one, but my grandma got me a book from Barnes & Noble around that time, because they were selling a lot of Spidey merchandise, and she knew I was a Spider-Man fan. She got me this book, Marvel Masterworks Spider-Man. And this has Amazing Fantasy 15, well, the Spider-Man story from Amazing Fantasy 15, because I believe there were other stories in that one, but it has the original Spider-Man story from Amazing Fantasy 15, and then it has the first 10 issues of the Amazing Spider-Man. And this was my first time really, I mean, I had read the comics before because I knew some friends that had them, but I had never really sat down and actually read them in order. And so this was my first time actually getting to sit down and read them in order, and I just loved it. And the Steve Ditko Spider-Man comic era, I consider pretty much better than anything else Spidey related. Like, the stuff with Steve Ditko's art. And I have been, like, really, probably even to the extreme about it. Probably to the point of being annoying about how the Steve Ditko era is absolutely better than anything else. How it's absolutely sacred and everything. And, anyway, that was basically my position on it, because I think there was hardly, most of the good Spider-Man stories were from that era, in my opinion, and I still do think that, at least comic book wise. But also around that time, I think this was around my senior year of high school, I started watching a lot of Spider-Man YouTube videos and stuff, and I did catch a few more episodes of The Spectacular Spider-Man on YouTube, because those would pop up frequently, even though I didn't watch any of them in order. And I started liking that show a little bit more. And then, when I was in college, about a year and a half ago, probably a little bit more now, I can't remember, but a year and a half ago at least, I went to Walmart with some friends. I found the complete series Spectacular Spider-Man, which was really surprising because I didn't even know it was on DVD at the time. And I bought it, the complete series. And I wish I could find the 90s animated series on DVD as well, because I know it hasn't actually been released on DVD in the US, but I wish I could find it sometime. But I bought the Spectacular Spider-Man, and then we used to have these movie nights in college. That's like on weekends. I'd get together with some friends, and we'd all go in like a dorm and watch a bunch of movies. And that's actually, since sometimes I would watch movies they brought and stuff, that I actually did get introduced to a lot of movies that I actually do like to this day through that. Like, even some of the movies you'll see in my movie collection video, some of those were ones that I saw when I was in college, because friends showed them to me. Movies I probably would have never thought, probably never even considered watching, had people not suggested to them. And what happened was, for some of those movie nights, instead of watching movies, we just watched The Spectacular Spider-Man. And this was my first time ever really watching The Spectacular Spider-Man from beginning to end. And I knew ahead of time that it got canceled too early, so it kind of ends without getting everything all tied up neatly. And I actually told them that. I said, be warned, it actually kind of ends on a semi-cliffhanger. And they said, that's okay. And we finished it within a few weekends, because we were binge watching it pretty much. We'd watch probably a bunch of episodes each weekend. And we got to the end, and everybody was really disappointed that it ended where it did, including me. But hey, we enjoyed it. And then I watched it again, and then I watched it again, and then I watched it again, over and over. I've watched it quite a few times now. I love it. In fact, it has actually eclipsed the Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics now, the Steve Ditko era Spider-Man comics. Like, I actually consider the Spectacular Spider-Man the definitive Spider-Man now. I believe it improved on it. I actually surprised myself with that. Collectively, though, I mean, mainly the Spectacular Spider-Man, but I'm also including the fanfic that continues the series unofficially as collectively with that. But it's mainly the series, because, you know, there has to be the whole thing about the existence of that, if you know what I'm saying. I can't really describe it very well because I'm really bad at that. But I came across that fanfic last summer. Actually, I think I came across it before that. It was around the time I was just getting out of college, and then I read the fanfic that summer. Like, I read it over a few weeks. It took a really long time, but I mean, it felt like a long book, even though it's, you know, a bunch of stories. So I read the old one because the new one wasn't finished yet. But, and that's why I'm actually really looking forward to being able to read the new one. Once I finish reviewing the Spectacular Spider-Man, because, I want to watch the Spectacular Spider-Man one more time before I actually read the current version of that fanfic. And I mean, it's not going to be the last time I watch the show, but it's just been a while since I watched the show, so I kind of need a refresher. And since I consider that the beginning of the story anyway, where the series begins, I kind of have to do that. So I think I've probably talked long enough. In fact, there was actually probably about an hour or so gap earlier where you saw the cut happen in the video because I got interrupted. So that's why it actually is more evening now than it was earlier, where it looked more like afternoon-like and everything. And, excuse me. So I've been talking long enough. We're gonna get on with this. I'm gonna talk episodes 1 through 3 of the Spectacular Spider-Man. And I'm going to talk about the plotline and everything. And be warned, spoilers, okay? Spoilers. If you haven't seen this series and you don't want spoilers, turn off this video right now. Okay, here we go. So we get the first episode. And I can never remember the episode names of these things because they have these names that have to do with, like, science and everything. So I'm just going to call them episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. And it doesn't begin with the origin story, similar to how the animated series, Spider-Man the animated series, didn't begin with the origin story. It begins with him. But the reason the animated series didn't begin with the origin story was because they didn't want to interfere with a movie that was going to be made that never actually got made, and thank goodness, because it was probably going to be really terrible. But even though they did cover the origin story in a couple later episodes of that, but I suspect the reason this doesn't begin with the origin story is for 2 reasons. One, because the Spectacular Spider-Man doesn't begin with it. One, because a lot of people are already familiar with it, and 2, because they found a way to work it in better later. And if you think about it, the way they did the Tobey Maguire movie, it kind of sped through things a bit too much. Because if you read the comics, you'll notice his Uncle Ben dies and he doesn't do a complete turnaround right away. He actually takes quite a while to fully mature, become a true hero and everything. Like, just read the early comics. He's an absolute jerk a lot of the time. It's actually quite surprising if you're used to the Tobey Maguire movies. But the Tobey Maguire, since they kind of had to make the first movie fairly self-contained, even though they did leave a few things open-ended to lead to a sequel, the the first movie, they can't just end it with him not having learned all that much. So of course his character development happens pretty much all in one movie. And it's kind of undermines Peter Parker's character. But the way they do this in the Spectacular Spider-Man is they begin with him having already been Spider-Man, because just like in the comics, he got his powers in his sophomore year. I think in this version, in the Spectacular Spider-Man, he got them near the end of his sophomore year, and he had like a whole summer to kind of mature and stuff. And even though he's not fully mature yet at the beginning of the series, like he's not even as mature as Tobey Maguire was like 10 minutes after the Uncle Ben's death happened in the movie. Because of course it's going to take longer than a whole summer. But it skips over all that stuff that that you had to read through in the comics, where it takes him a while to get to the point where you're going to start seeing him more heroically and all that stuff. So we get to skip over that. And then so we begin at the beginning of his junior year of high school, where he's already had his powers for a full summer. And he's swinging around, and he comes across Flint Marko and Alex O'Hearn, which I think, as Spider-Man fans know, they will become two of the villains in later episodes. That if you haven't seen beyond the first 3 episodes yet, and you don't know anything about Spider-Man lore, you have no idea who these guys are going to become yet, but I'm going to say right now, they're going to be 2 of the major villains of the series, and anybody who's read the comics knows that. But what I really, really like about this, and I haven't seen this very often in other adaptations, is they set up the villains early on, rather than just introducing these guys who will become villains in the episodes where they become the supervillains. They introduce them a few episodes before that, so they can kind of build up to it. So, Flint Marko and Alex O'Hearn are these two jewel thieves, I think. Yeah. And Spider-Man webs them up, and Hammerhead gets footage of Spider-Man, and he shows it to the big man. Hammerhead is another villain, by the way. And he shows the footage to the big man, who we don't know who that is yet. And Spider-Man is apparently a legend at this point. Like, few people have even seen him. Like, he's mainly legend. And he decides to send the Enforcers out. And the first time I saw this episode, I'm like, wow, the Enforcers in episode 1. Because Amazing Spider-Man issue number 10 is one of my favorite Spider-Man comic books. I just love the Enforcers story. And so he decides to send the Enforcers after Spider-Man. And Spider-Man, Peter wakes up in the morning the next day, and he goes downstairs and he hears his Aunt May talking to one of her neighbors about how they're kind of poor now because her husband, Uncle Ben, has died, and we see like a picture of Uncle Ben on the wall with Peter. So we understand that Uncle Ben was really close with Peter. So anybody that doesn't know the origin story yet, when they're watching this series, they'll know that Uncle Ben died previously to this, and that he was really close to Peter, and that he kind of misses him. But we don't really get anything beyond that, so we're able to kind of, the people who made this show are kind of able to, like, build up to when we actually hear the origin story, which we won't be hearing it for a while, but we will hear about it eventually. So we know about that. We don't know exactly why Peter became Spider-Man yet, but we will get to that. And here's what happens. Peter decides that he needs to earn money for Aunt May. He goes to his first day of high school, and he tries to ask Sally Averill out. And Sally, if you know, she actually appeared in the very first Spider-Man story, like the original Spider-Man story in Amazing Fantasy 15, where he actually tries to ask her out before he gets his powers, and she's not interested in him. It's pretty awesome. So that's kind of a little bit of a reference to that. I really like that, even though, of course, in the comics, if they had followed the comic continuity, that technically would have happened months ago, rather than right now. But this doesn't 100% follow the comics. It does its own thing while still following the spirit of the comics, because it kind of combines the 616 universe, which is the mainstream comics, like the original, and it also has like the 1610 universe, 1610, with the what's it called, Ultimate Marvel, not that stupid Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, because screw that one, but Ultimate Marvel, the comics, which are also really, really good. I recommend checking those out sometime. It's a nice way to, like, reimagine the Spider-Man stories, do something new, kind of. So they combined, like, the best parts of both, like, did, like, a hybrid type thing. So they also have Peter having known, even though in the 616 universe, he met Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy when he was in college. And this version, and the Spectacular Spider-Man, they kind of take some inspiration from Ultimate. And he's known Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy from his days in school for quite a few years, maybe since childhood. I'm going to have to watch more of the series because I don't remember all the details about it. But he's known them for years. They're like his best friends. And I know that's not 100% faithful to Ultimate. I think Gwen Stacy in this one might be based more off of the Ultimate version of Mary Jane. So this was kind of their way to have like the Ultimate Mary Jane and the 616 Mary Jane at the same time, because the 616 Mary Jane is obviously the more famous version of the Mary Jane character. So of course they had to have the one that's actually called Mary Jane in the series to be based off the 616 version. So they kind of take the Ultimate Mary Jane and they call her Gwen, and they make her a nerd. And this actually works out really, really well, because kind of before this, Gwen was basically just Peter Parker's girlfriend that died. And yeah, that's pretty much all she was. She's a bland, uninteresting character. It was really shocking at the time when she died in the 616 universe, because everybody's like, oh, how could you do that? But nowadays when you read it, it's not even all that much of a shock. I mean, even if you didn't know it was going to happen, she's such a boring character. Like, I think what happened was whoever wrote that story, I can't remember the exact author's name right now, he thought he could develop Mary Jane better as a character, and so he just killed off Gwen to get her out of the picture. Everybody got really mad, but then years later they thought, she was uninteresting anyway. But now they're able to kind of make Gwen a better character, and it's kind of, I'm not really 100% sure if they were going to kill off Gwen. I know for a fact they said it wasn't going to happen in the show itself, but after the show was finished, like if they had actually finished the series properly, they were going to do some TV movies that were darker and edgier than the actual show itself, some TV movies to kind of finish things off with the show. And I'm not sure if Gwen would have died in one of those, like if there was gonna be a TV movie that centered around Gwen's death. I'm not sure if they ever intended to kill her off, but considering they intended to have him marry Mary Jane, get married to Mary Jane at the end of the series or something like that. I'm not really sure how that would have worked, because I can't really see this Peter choosing Mary Jane over Gwen in this version. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So they either would have had to do something really clever, or they really were going to kill Gwen off. I suspect they really were going to kill Gwen off. Really. But man, that still would have been quite a shock to me. And actually, we'll get back to that because of what we're going to be doing. What this series is going to comprise of. There's going to be a lot of shocks in both this series, this TV series, and the fanfic we're going to be reading. So, get ready for that. But I like this version of Gwen. He's a nice character. They actually did something interesting with her. She's not just Peter's girlfriend who died. She actually has characterization now. So Peter tries to ask out Sally, and she rejects him, and he gets embarrassed and everything. His teacher, I think his name is Mr. Warren, I'm pretty sure, tells Peter about Dr. Connor's lab. And Peter remembers Dr. Connor's lab from the previous field trip he went to at the end, near the end of his sophomore year, where we actually see him get bit by the spider in the flashback scene. So we know right then, if you didn't catch it in the theme song already. By the way, the theme song is awesome. I know I'm going off topic a lot, jumping around here, but we'll get more into it. Anyway, so we know now how exactly he got his powers, even though we don't know the full origin story yet. So we see him get bit, and he says that it's a field trip he'll never forget to his teacher after his teacher reminds him about it. And his teacher tells him that Dr. Connors wants like 2 interns to like work for him, 2 like high school interns. And so Mr. Warren has suggested that Peter and Gwen do it because they're brilliant students. So Peter and Gwen agree to it, and Peter thinks he'll actually be able to earn money off of this for his Aunt May, so that he can help to pay her bills and everything. But he discovers later that they aren't actually, him and Gwen aren't actually going to get paid. They're just there for like the learning experience, I guess. I'm not quite sure 100% what it is, because I'm really bad at understanding these kinds of things. So if you can explain that to me better down in the comment section, that'll be really interesting. And then we actually see Eddie Brock working at the Connors lab, because Eddie Brock is a college freshman and he's working at the Connors lab now. And this is really cool because this is setting up another character who will appear later, and I think most of you probably know who Eddie Brock is, even if you haven't seen the series. But once again, building up to it, and I know the animated series did this as well. This is one of the few villains they foreshadowed early on. Oops, I just gave away there was a villain, but oh well. Anyway, he's apparently a childhood friend of Peter Parker, which I think came from Ultimate. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's from Ultimate right there. Anyway, we get introduced to Harry's father, Norman Osborn. He's stolen ideas from Adrian Toomes, some tech flight. And Adrian Toomes gets really ticked off at him for stealing his ideas, and he takes the flying harness he made and attacks Norman with it out of revenge. And Peter has to, Spider-Man has to save Norman from it. And Norman Osborn is a jerk on this show. I mean, I absolutely hate him. And I hate him more and more and more as the show goes on. And even as the fanfic that we'll be reading after this goes on. So anyway, he is just awful. Probably my favorite depiction of Norman Osborn ever, just because of how awful he is. And, so at Oscorp, which is Norman Osborn's company, so, Vulture attacks Norman Osborn, and Spider-Man has to save him, and the Enforcers come to, like, attack Spider-Man at the same time. They're flying towards him in a helicopter and stuff, and, so Spider-Man, like, attacks the Vulture, and he comes up with a plan to, like, stop him and the Enforcers at the same time. He, like, breaks the Vulture's wings on the propeller of the helicopter the Enforcers are driving, which also damages the propeller, so that the Enforcers have to land their helicopter, and Spider-Man catches 2 of the 3 of them, I believe. And then he pulls out the electronic components of the Vulture's flying harness to, like, disable it. Once he's got him under control by, like, damaging his wings and stuff. And we get a reference to the actual first Vulture comic where he says, "You'll kill us both!" And then Spider-Man, like, spins a web to, like, stop them from falling. Where Spider-Man's like, "Yeah, right." Even though in the comics he used his, like, scientific knowledge to, like, build a device to disable the wings rather than pulling out the components, which would have kind of been interesting to see in this series, but we don't want it to be too predictable, so I can let that slide. And, he webs Vulture up, and then he gets arrested as well. And he also comes up with the idea, since he isn't really a legend anymore, like everybody knows he exists now, he decides to go visit the Daily Bugle, give them the idea to take pictures of Spider-Man, and then they can, and then he can earn money for taking pictures of Spider-Man, because he's the only one who can really get really good pictures of him, since he is Spider-Man. I mean, who else, you know? Even though nobody knows that. So he visits the Beagle, and we get introduced to J. Jonah Jameson, who is voiced by Darren Norris, who voiced Venom in Spider-Man 2000 video game, and probably my favorite version of Venom ever. But he voices J. Jonah Jameson in this one. And, he probably is my second favorite version of J. Jonah Jameson after J.K. Simmons, who played him in, the Raimi series, since I think J.K. Simmons literally is J. Jonah Jameson. And Far From Home, I loved the mid-credit scene of Far From Home. It made me smile. Loved seeing him back and everything. I said spoilers for Far From Home, guys, so sorry if you didn't take that advice, but anyway. So he goes and visits J. Jonah Jameson of the Daily Bugle. Jameson says he doesn't care about getting pictures of Spider-Man, kicks him out, and then says, "We need pictures of Spider-Man," and, like, takes the idea. So Peter's like, "Okay, I'll try to take pictures of Spider-Man," even though he doesn't tell J. Jonah Jameson that, because he doesn't find out that J. Jonah Jameson is going to try to get pictures of Spider-Man until after he leaves, because J. Jonah Jameson doesn't want to hire a kid. So Peter tries to get pictures of Spider-Man, but he keeps failing, getting, like, really bad shots. And meanwhile, Max Dillon, who works, I think he's like a maintenance man at Dr. Kurt Connor's lab, gets into a really bad accident with a tank full of genetically modified electric eels. And so he's rushed to the hospital, and they build him this insulated suit in the hospital to, like, stabilize him. But he gets ticked off, and he storms out and starts getting all mad. And Peter Parker doesn't realize that it's him, and gets him even more mad. And basically, Max Dillon is Electro now, one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, and they actually did him well, unlike that awful, Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie where he was a piece of crap. I mean, the actor was good. He could have been a really, really good Electro. Like, I think his name was Jamie Foxx or whatever. He could have been a really good Electro, but he was given a terrible script that didn't make any sense whatsoever. And anyway, meanwhile, Peter is with Liz Allen because Mr. Warren is worried about Liz Allen's grades. And Liz Allen is another character from the Spider-Man comics who is Flash Thompson's girlfriend. And Flash Thompson is the bully, of course, Peter Parker's bully. And so he recommends, Mr. Warren recommends that Liz Allen get tutoring lessons from Peter Parker. And Liz Allen kind of secretly likes Peter Parker, but at the same time pretends that she doesn't because she wants to be Flash's girlfriend and doesn't want to reveal that she actually likes Peter and stuff. So it's kind of that whole thing where she wants to be in with the crowd, which I think is pretty consistent with the comics. I don't think 100%, but it is kind of similar. And so she gets tutoring from Peter Parker. And that's when Electro decides to attack Dr. Connors and wants to get revenge. He's like, change me back, but Dr. Connors doesn't know how. So Electro tries to kill Dr. Connors. Peter has to save him. And he knocks Electro into a giant swimming pool to, like, disable him. And then Electro gets arrested. So then, I think around this time, I think this is actually because this is the second episode that had Electro in it, but at the end of the first episode, he found out that he has to get home before 10 o'clock every night, and if he knows that he's not going to be able to, he has to call his Aunt May before that, because that's the curfew. But, he keeps doing that, because of course he has to do his job as Spider-Man, because he feels that obligation. So, he calls Aunt May like every single day because he's always fighting crime and stuff, and Aunt May's like, you can't do this every night. So then, if you notice in the Electro battle, Dr. Connors' lizard formula that he's working on actually gets zapped by Electro. Gets like some electricity running through it. And at the beginning of the next episode, episode 3, Dr. Connors injects himself with it because he's trying to regrow his arm by using lizard DNA. And I kind of wonder if the electricity running through it actually had something to do with suddenly making the formula work for him, because I think he was testing it out earlier in the show and it wasn't working. Don't quote me on that, because I kind of forget a lot of these things. So his arm grows back that night. And then the next day they have a party at Dr. Connors' lab with Peter and Gwen, Eddie Brock being there and everything. But they notice that Dr. Connors is starting to like grow like lizard scales, and he's starting to like get lizard-minded and stuff. He becomes like less human as more minutes go by. And they know that the lizard DNA is starting to take over his body. And he's going to eventually turn into a lizard completely. So that's like backfired. So they have to race against time to try to make a gene cleanser, which will take out any non-human DNA from somebody's system if they take it. And Peter knows that such a thing could if it works properly, like if it's made properly, and if it's 100% reliable, it will also take his powers away. So if he wants to stop being Spider-Man, he could take a gene cleanser. So they make a bunch of vials of gene cleanser. And meanwhile, Dr. Connors does turn into a lizard completely goes mindless because of that. Like, he's completely lizard-minded now. Goes on a rampage and attacks a zoo. So Peter dresses as Spider-Man without anybody seeing him. He goes, attacks the lizard along with Eddie Brock helping him. Knocks the lizard into a polar bear area where there's cold water. So, like, slow lizard down, since lizards are cold-blooded and they need warm water and warm air and everything. Slows him down, dumps the gene cleanser down his throat, and turns him back into Dr. Connors. And then here's where he makes his biggest mistake. He's so set on getting perfect pictures to get to the Daily Bugle. And I mean, I don't fault him for wanting to get money for his Aunt May. But then he also isn't considering other people other than his family at the same time while doing that. And this is consistent with the Peter Parker from the comics, who is really, really immature and sometimes doesn't think things through all the way. He makes really, really foolish decisions quite a bit. Like, if you know, in the issue number 9, where he actually photoshops some pictures, and J. Jonah Jameson gets really mad at him after he finds out. And Peter Parker should have lost his job right then and there, but luckily J. Jonah Jameson cares more about the money that Peter Parker has from the legitimate pictures than he does about Peter Parker fooling him that one time. But anyway, what happens is Peter takes pictures of himself fighting the Lizard, even though he doesn't show it being Dr. Connors, because they don't want anybody to know that Dr. Connors is a Lizard, because it could get him in really big trouble. And what he does is he sends him to the Bugle, and he wins the prize for who should be the photographer for Spider-Man. And so Dr. Connors and his wife find out. They get mad at Peter for taking the pictures. He gets fired. And he takes a vial of gene cleanser with him that he plans to drink in order to not be Spider-Man ever again, because he's tired of being Spider-Man. Everything just seems to go wrong for him. But he decides not to drink it. But please note, he doesn't get rid of the gene cleanser. He hides it somewhere. So it's going to pop up again later. And that's the end of story arc number 1 of The Spectacular Spider-Man. And I think it's a great opening to the series. We get to see, like, some of Peter Parker's immaturity, which we didn't get to see much of in the Raimi films, even though I think Tobey Maguire still did a really good job and everything. And even though it's not as good as some of the other story arcs we'll be seeing later on, I still think it's a very, very solid start to the series and everything. And I think I'll really enjoy if you guys will stick with me through this entire thing, because if it goes as planned, this is going to be going for quite a while. Because we're not, like I said, we're not just doing the series. We're also doing the fanfic that I talked about, which is even longer than the series, than the TV series. But I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope maybe down in the comment section of this YouTube video, you'll give me some advice on maybe some style to change, maybe a different way to do this review. But I'm really going to enjoy this, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. So until next time, this has been Kurt the Gamer.